Team Gathering, we're excited to be with you today. Another podcast. I think this is, Eric, like podcast number 4 for the Gathering. We've had a little background of the history of the Gathering, locker rooms. Our last one was conversation about race. And today we are excited to have with us our author, speaker, pastor, leader. The list goes on and on. I don't know how many titles Scott has to his name, husband, father, all those kind of good things. But Scott Sauls from the greatest city in the world, Nashville, Tennessee, my hometown. Sorry to Springfield, which I love, and many other cities. But Scott, let me give you a little background. I want you to know, I don't remember if you recall how I got turned on to you, but I was reading an article on Easter Sunday 2019, and I can't remember where I got it from, but I was reading an article you wrote. And I'm at my in-laws, and many people, I guess, probably when they're at a family function might find some time to kind of veer off to the side. So I did that. And I think I went to your blog page and read like 20 blogs over an hour or so. I'm like, man, I love the way this guy writes. He speaks my language. He's very gracious, but he's not afraid to challenge. So all that fit me pretty well. So thank you for being a guinea pig and being our first guest via satellite. And hopefully this is worth your time today, and I'm sure the folks that check this out online will be blessed by what you have to give to us. So, Scott, tell me about the last 3 months. I mean, everybody has to talk about pivots and how life has changed. What's some of the good and the bad for you over the last few months?
Room has been, something we'd never expected, something we'd never planned for, certainly something we'd never been trained for. And so, big learning curve for us and for our team. I think our team has done a pretty good job doing that. And yet I for one, am eager to get on the other side of this and to see what ends up being different and what ends up going back to what it was after the fact. But, to say the least, it's been a disorienting time for us, just like it has with everybody else.
Well, in that, Scott, what do you think you've learned about yourself that maybe you wouldn't have learned about yourself through some other mechanism or process or system?
I've learned again that I'm surrounded by a great team of people. That's not new information, but it's just another data point for that. But in terms of learning about myself, I think really more just learned about spiritual formation and God. I haven't been panicking. I haven't been afraid. Haven't been worried. Haven't been down in the dumps during this season, which to me speaks to, at least in my experience, the long-term effect of meditating on the truths and promises of God every single day. And it's during times when you're thrown a curveball, when you're thrown off center, that you realize what the stuff you've been building your life around is really made of. And I hope this is just a small little sign of maybe what my demeanor will be like when I'm dying, or when something really like super tragic happens, as it will be the case for all of us eventually. But for me, I'm discovering in a small way that everything that we're building our lives around is actually true. That God is still on his throne. He's sovereign. He knows exactly what he's doing. Nothing takes him by surprise. And he's going to make good of all this. And we can know that even without seeing it yet. And so I've learned that. I've learned that the promises of God are solid, and experientially so in our case. while also being very, very open to this whole season being over
Yeah.
and
You know, I say
moving on.
often,
So
I think it's really true right now. We need to realize God's never had an oh crap, oops, didn't see that coming moment. And I kept waiting for you to go to Philippians 4:8 because we're going to get to that. It's obviously in your book. But what a great passage. And I think sometimes there's scriptures that seem to be always applicable. And I think Philippians 4:8, which, like I said, you have in your book, is very appropriate. What are we going to fix our eyes on? You know, are we going to have our eyes on what's pure, what's noble, what's good, and all those things in that verse? And yeah, I like where you went with that. So speaking of the book, here it is. Thank you for the copy of that. This has been a great, timely thing. Did you ever think when you would write this that this book had come at a time that it was ever more needed than when it landed? I mean, you couldn't have planned it better. God clearly knew that this thing needed to drop when it did.
yeah, I mean, I guess the book was conceived about 2 years ago as an idea, and the only thing that was on my mind at that time was things didn't go too well in 2016, and they probably aren't going to go too well in 2020. When the election happens, and I was just thinking, hey, maybe I can put something out that is timed well with the next election cycle that will help, especially people who identify as followers of Christ, navigate it with more grace and kindness, as opposed to just jumping right into the stream of cancel culture and culture wars and everything else. I would have never imagined that by this time in July we still wouldn't have even started talking about the election yet, because
Sure.
there's so many other things that have come to our attention. I tell people whenever I'm in this conversation, I'm not happy about all the things that make the book as timely as it is, while also being glad to be part of the conversation. But if I could wish all these hard things away, I would. And sell fewer books. I'd rather sell fewer books and have a world that's not turning in on itself, as it seems to be. But that's God's job to orchestrate those things, not mine.
I love your heart in that, Scott. One of the things I'm really drawn to about your style and the way you present yourself in your writing is you lead from a humble posture. You're not afraid to admit where you fall short, where you've dropped the ball, and yet you want to run into the storm. And I'm a pretty bold guy, but I think I struggle sometimes wanting to run into the storm. I mean, you had the article on your blog a few weeks ago about when you talked in a sermon a number of years ago, I think it was, about race, and how some people came up to you afterwards, and basically you had said some things that might have hurt some people. And I just love that learning posture at which you come from. And that's one of the things, like I said, why I like to read your stuff, because I know I'm going to learn because you're learning and you're not afraid to put it out there. So speak to that as it ties to writing. I mean, when you write, I know Mark Batterson has said that research shows if someone writes a book, they've given the better part of 2 years of their life to a book. So when you write, you're having to put some stuff aside as a pastor, as a leader, in your various roles you carry at the workplace at Christ Presbyterian and at home, and yet there's great benefit in that. So speak to kind of writing and what that means for you and why you do it and what you're hoping to accomplish through writing books and blogs and whatnot that way.
Well, I mean, I started writing just because our communications team said I should start a blog a couple of years ago, or 5-6 years ago, 6-ish years ago. Our communications team said, "Hey, why don't you start a blog? That'll be another way to, reach a different group of people." And so I started a blog, and that ended up, leading to invitations from literary agents and publishers to consider writing books, which was never something that was in the plan. It was never something I actually aspired to do, and initially said no. There are a whole bunch of great people writing books out there. I just see myself as a person who can help popularize what other people are doing, and But eventually, I guess Jesus Outside the Lines was sort of the first concept that came to mind that, at least at the time, I wasn't aware of anything like it out there. I started to sense, 6-7 years ago, what is now outrage culture was just starting to brew at that time, and starting to become more and more apparent. And I became increasingly concerned about generational divides and racial divides and political and ideological divides around different subjects. And that started to form my preaching. It started to form a lot of the sort of public, forums and outreach, gatherings that we would curate. And it sort of developed into a theme, and that developed into, an invitation to publish at the time with Tyndale House, and they were gracious to offer a 2-book deal, which led to Jesus Outside the Lines and Befriend, and haven't stopped writing ever since. It's just, and really the reason is that the books, the chief reason is the books actually benefit the mission of our church. It gives us resources to hand to our people, and that's direct source material from their own lead pastor, and thankfully all of my books have made it out to other networks and tribes and ministries and churches and so on, and that's been a nice byproduct. But that was never the goal. The goal was just to create stuff that would be helpful to our own discipleship process with our team and our people, and it's led to, I guess, having a ripple effect of sorts. And so thankful for that, but it was never in the plans. Yeah. And so now it is, by the grace of God. So I'll keep doing it until I stop doing it. Whenever that'll be.
I'm always amazed at why people write, why they communicate, what's that process. So your people ask you to do it for your sake, for the sake of the church. I forgot who I read. Somebody that's done some pretty substantial writing. I want to say it was like J.D. Greer, but that probably is wrong. But whoever it was said, just so everybody knows, I am writing for my people. I'm not taking into account other people beyond my church. My whole goal is to write for my church. I read Paula Ferris's book, if you're familiar with Paula Ferris, over the weekend, and she talked about she was approached, having been on Good Morning America and A View and whatnot, to write a book. And she said, I don't feel like I have anything to say. And then she stepped away and whatnot, and then she felt like God had said, well, now you've got something to say because you kind of recreated. So it's always interesting to hear why people do it. And I got to tell you, Scott, as much as I was excited about this book, I'm still kind of ticked off a little bit because I feel like the word gentle and gentleness is hitting me from every corner since around the time I knew you were writing this. I've been doing with some people a book called Gospel Fluency by Jeff Vanderstelt, which is an incredible kind of tool about the gospel interacting in every part of our lives. Gentleness is in there. If I were to go to listen to some random song on the radio right now, the word gentle is going to appear in it. And I'm like, Lord, what are you telling me about my lack of gentleness or needing to grow in it or whatever? So speak to how Jesus is the ultimate example of gentleness. And then how would someone grow, like I'm trying to do, in gentleness? What would be a good first or next step into growing in gentleness?
Well, I would say that, to your first question, Jesus, added an extra I am statement about himself, right? The Gospel of John has what we call the 7 I am statements of Christ. I'm the good shepherd, I'm the vine, I'm the way, the truth, the life, I'm the resurrection and the life, and so on. Then in Matthew's Gospel, he has another I am statement where he says, I am gentle and lowly in heart. That's in Matthew chapter 11. And, he's come to give us rest for our souls and a yoke that's easy and a burden that's light. And, gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit, which of course means that it's a key attribute of Christ himself. And we see it on display in so many places in his life where he heals not only people who are on his side, but people who are against him. I think about that night when Judas betrayed him, and Peter, takes out a sword and cuts off the ear of one of the attackers named Malchus, and Jesus heals him. He rebukes not his enemy, but he rebukes his friend and says, Peter, that's not the way I operate. That's not the way we operate. And he heals the guy. And then he has an encounter with Judas in the same episode. And Judas is the one that's led all of these people to Jesus as the ultimate betrayer. Judas was the instigator and the traitor that led Jesus to being crucified. And while Judas is in the act of betraying him, Jesus calls him friend. And then, you head to the cross. Christ goes to the cross, and we find him praying for those who are crucifying him. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. We find him forgiving the thief on the cross, the unbaptized thief on the cross, who only moments before had been insulting him along with the other thief. He was crucified between two thieves, and that one thief was desperate and scared and said, Lord, please remember me in your kingdom. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. No scolding, nothing. You got Zacchaeus, a public crook, that everybody despises, and Jesus, come on down from the tree. Zacchaeus calls him by name. I'm coming to your house today. Befriends him. He welcomes sinners and eats with them. He's always, being kind to those who were not welcome in the religious communities. And it's not just what he did. Gentleness isn't just what he did. It's who he was and who he is. And it's central and core to his identity. But the thing about gentleness that I think is important for anybody to understand when it comes to gentleness that comes from Christ is that it's not a wimpy thing. It's an incredibly gutsy thing. It's resilient. It's a great power. The ability to be gentle, which is very different than being nice. Being nice is conflict averse. Being nice is wimpy. Being nice is more concerned what people think about you than you are with what's right and what's true and what's good and excellent and noble and praiseworthy and so on. Being gentle, ultimately got Jesus crucified. And the fruit of gentleness was part of what got 11 of the 12 disciples martyred. Because gentleness also means a gutsy form of forgiving those who injure you, of blessing those who persecute and betray you, of using anger well. There's a redemptive, life-giving form of anger, right? It's the anger that attacks problems instead of people. And when you attack problems, those who are trying to protect those problems, because they love the problems more than they love health, problems like cancel culture, problems like outrage culture, problems like racism, problems like poverty, problems like partisan bickering. When you attack those problems, some people, you'll become a problem to some people, right? But we attack problems, not people. Unrighteous anger or self-righteous anger attacks people. But righteous anger attacks problems and tries to bring people along with us to join us in attacking those problems. That's what Martin Luther King did. That's what every excellent leader in world history has done. Is that they've been consensus people and bridge builders who have attacked problems. C.S. Lewis says that Christianity is a fighting religion. It sees what's wrong with the world, and it goes on the attack against the wrong out of love for what's good and what's right and beautiful. And I think that's a paraphrase, I think, from Mere Christianity. And so I think it's a mistake to mistake gentleness for being a wimp. It's a mistake to mistake gentleness for being just nice. Jesus flips tables over. Jesus, calls some people snakes and whitewashed tombs. But he's attacking problems. He's going against a certain status quo and a certain way of thinking because he cares about the people that he's confronting and he wants to win them. And he also wants to protect the people that they're bullying. And he's like, if you're going to bully these people, you got to get through me before you get to them. And by the way, you're never going to get through me. And so, gentleness is protective. It's strong, and it's kind. It doesn't seek to injure people. It seeks to destroy that which injures people. And so I'd say a lot more about that. But I suspect if your listeners read through the table of contents in the book, they would say, this doesn't sound like a book on gentleness as I understand it at all. Because it's a lot more fierce of a virtue than we tend to think of it.
And you unpack that very well in the book. I like when you brought up the word nice, because you definitely unpack that a bit more than what you just did right there. And to that point, I mean, gentleness, I think I take that word as I'm studying it a bit, doing a little bit of homework through some other things. Over nice, definitely. Over kindness, I think, as well. And you talked about, how you can attack people, not problems. I would imagine in a church your size in a city like Nashville, Tennessee, you could be seen as a problem to some people. Is that fair to say? That you're
Sure.
So how do you respond to that? Like, how do you not be afraid to go into culture where things need to be challenged, where things need to be changed, not be status quo, and take being a problem and run with that in a different direction, I guess?
I mean, I think part of following Christ, it's paradoxical, because if you're on the narrow path, your embrace is going to be wide, right? The more you're on board with Jesus, the more inclusive you're going to be as a human being. The wider your tent, the bigger your definition of us is going to be, and at the same time, the more hostility you're going to invite especially from the polar extremes. And the way that there's some of my friends and I who like to really live in the tension of Jesus being full of grace and truth, law and love, the kindness and severity of God. Paul says in Romans, consider the kindness and severity of God, who want to live in that tension rather than, going all law, no grace and becoming bullies, or going all grace, no law and becoming cowards and codependent enablers. We want to be full of grace and truth. What's going to happen when we really do build our lives around a platform and a message and a way of being that is full of grace and truth, we're going to discover before too long that we are too irritatingly conservative for our liberal friends and too irritatingly liberal for our conservative friends. And it's really wild. Like watch this. If you're say you're a Christian who wants to really put this book, A Gentle Answer, or that one, or the unintended but true companion, Jesus Outside the Lines, which is more the practical outworking of what that book's more about. The heart of cultivating our hearts toward gentleness. Jesus Outside the Lines is which was my first book, is more about the practical outworkings in different ways of these things. But if you really set out to live as what Tim Keller calls a third way, where you've got grace, you've got truth, and you're forging the path, living in that tension on all things, sexuality, race, politics, gender, etc. You are going to get accused of being a closet liberal by conservatives. You're going to get accused of being a closet conservative by liberals. You're gonna be accused of being too wrapped up in politics by people who are too wrapped up in politics, and they can't label you, they can't nail you, they can't pin you down, because you are so frustratingly comprehensive in your pro-life position. You're from womb to tomb. You're not unborn children at the expense of poor people and minorities and refugees. You're not refugees and the poor at the expense of the unborn. You're all of the above, and that's going to drive partisans crazy. And for good or for ill, our society and our churches are filled with partisans who are discipled, who allow themselves to be discipled 10 times more by cable news rhetoric than they allow themselves to be discipled by Jesus and the fullness of Scripture.
Well, now that ties in well to what you said with the one part of the book I was going to get to in a minute, where you talk about we'd rather be kind of ministered to or labeled by Uncle Sam than by Jesus. And I think, as I hear you talk, Scott, I've never thought this about you before, but I've been enraptured in the last year a couple times over in the book The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer. I'm going to guess maybe you've read that or played with it or whatever. But,
yeah.
You know, when you look at those 23, and it doesn't even do it justice to say traits, qualities, characteristics of God, I think you kind of modernize and bring to light the fullness of the gospel, the fullness of following Christ in the tension. And the tension's hard. I mean, there's no doubt about it. With all the issues you talked about, race, sexuality, whatever, those things are all very difficult. But what's the alternative? To just run from that and only be partisan and only be whatever? So maybe speak to that a little bit as far as, you know, you had the quote in there about Uncle Sam versus Jesus, and how we kind of wrap ourselves, whether it would be in a flag or whatever. And see, I hate this. I have the notes that we had beforehand, but then I'm kind of taking it a different direction on some of these things because you just hit some great points. And like I said, I think there's kind of an A.W. Tozer, anywhere you could go off and compromise something about the gospel. I just don't see you do that. You bring it back in, and grace and truth fit together, and this fits together. So maybe elaborate on that a little bit for me.
On the subject of politics, you mean?
Well, just with any of those things. I mean, being in the tension, and you know, like I said, we can either escape and leave the tension of culture with any of these topics we're talking about, racism or whatever, and be partisan. But what's that really going to solve? And it's not the way of Jesus.
Yeah, it's not. I guess I'll go the political direction on this.
Sure.
Jesus is not a nationalist. And so if your love for America is so obsessive that you have no love for the rest of the world, then you're not, no matter what you tell yourself, you're not being discipled by Jesus. If your picture of Jesus is a white guy with blue eyes, who looks like a member of the Bee Gees, then you're not paying attention to who he is. Oh, go ahead. You're going to say something.
That cuts deep because my daughter would tell you I'm a huge Bee Gees fan. So
I love the Bee Gees.
That hurt pretty hard right there.
I love the Bee Gees, and I got the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
Can we get a third guy and do some songs? A third guy. But here's music.
Maybe, but here's the thing. I love the Bee Gees. I love being American. I'm thankful that I was born American. I remind, my friends who are cynical about America that every immigrant that I know who had to earn their citizenship would the most thankful day of their lives every year is July 4th. And sometimes we don't know how good we have it because we're so fixated on the problems, and we have a lot of problems. But that's not to say that I'm, un-American, anti-American, whatever, or that I'm un-Bee Gees or anti-Bee Gees. But it is to say that in the climate that we're in, which is so driven by partisan thinking, and it's seeped in so deeply into the churches, and you've got far right-leaning knockoffs of Christianity, and you've got far left-leaning knockoffs of Christianity, and both are characterized by fundamentalism. Fundamentalism meaning we're right, you're wrong. Luke 18:9 describes it this way: people who are confident in themselves that they are righteous and look down on other people with contempt. That's a great description of the American partisan landscape, and Jesus has nothing to do with it. Nothing. And yet you've got so many people who identify as followers of Christ thinking they're doing the work of God by standing up for either a left-leaning or a right-leaning, partisan platform. But I love what I love what my friend Duke Kwan from Washington D.C. says about Christianity and politics. He says we should certainly be involved because politics and government are a vehicle through which we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. We use that little bit of power that our democratic society gives us, whether it's through a vote or through a voice. We use that little bit of power first and foremost, not thinking how can I advantage myself and my people with this power, but thinking as a Christian, what does it mean for me to love my neighbor as myself? And let that be our question as we engage politics. How's that? But the other thing is that we should never over-identify with a party, because every party is created not by God but by flawed human beings, and has gaps, has holes, has injustices embedded, because every party prefers one segment of the human community over another segment of the human community. Nationalist parties only think of ourselves and just to hell with the rest of the world. Parties that are all about the poor and the least of these, and people without resources, to hell with rich people. And then parties that are all about protecting wealth and all of that, to hell with people who are struggling. They just need to get a job. They just need to work harder. They just need to pull themselves up by the bootstrap. Everybody is ignoring the needs of somebody else and obsessing about their own sort of agenda and tribal platforms and that sort of thing. And Christ says it's the opposite. Like, if you want to follow me, you've got to deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me, not deny your neighbor, take up your comforts and follow your dreams. And denying your neighbor, taking up your comforts and following your dreams is the American partisan political way. And you've actually got to you've got to have the opposite posture. If you really want to say with integrity that you're following Jesus, and that in your mind and in your heart and in your life, the kingdom of Jesus truly is the kingdom that's higher than any other kingdom, and the name above every name. Don't just give it lip service. Prove it through the way that you engage the political process. The way that you engage the political process will look a little bit weird to the vast majority of people, because you're not bashing anyone. You're attacking problems.
How needed that is.
You're attacking problems instead of people. You're not painting massive, ugly caricatures of them and completely overlooking even the toxic, completely unjust things that are going on in your own tribe, and treating your own tribe as if it's the savior of the world. That's just dishonest. It's dishonest. And so Duke Kwan, writes about how. He's got several essays out about this, available on the internet somewhere. But he basically says, Christians should never over-identify with one political party or another, because you're always going to see holes and gaps and problems in whatever political party. It doesn't mean you can't be part of a political party, but it means that be willing to critique just as well as you're willing to affirm, and try to find something good to say about the other party, that your party's not doing well. That's actually what a Christian would do, because a Christian is a more honest person than a partisan person is. So anyway, I'll stop. I've said a lot. I've said too much there, but
we need more time. I tell you what, you're sharing some good stuff. You're sharing some good stuff, Scott. I really, I think of what you just said there. When I was a recruiter for a local university, one of the things we talked about a lot was we didn't have the resources or this or that of another school, but let's just talk up our school. And if somebody brought up something about another school, we'd try to talk positive about it where we could, but we didn't need to try to get students to come to our school by trashing, somewhere else they may be looking at. So I'm going to shift and keep my gathering hat on and talk about men here a little bit. So I had a conversation recently with our men's ministry at our church with Dan Ryland. I'm guessing you guys might have crossed paths at some point, but he's down at 12 Stone Church, has worked closely with John Maxwell and Kevin Myers at different times. And you've been very, multiple times you've given, and you've already said his name, you've referenced Tim Keller and what he's meant to you and his example. And I think you had one or two whole blogs about that. So speak to mentoring in your life, and obviously Tim Keller is a key one. And then what has been invested in you that you model and live out in other people in your life, particularly men, since our tagline is connecting men to men and men to God. What is kind of pivotal and crucial, do you think, about mentoring?
Yeah, I think for Tim, he was more of a hands-off than he was a hands-on mentor. I don't want to give any idea that like we would sit down every day and have these mentor conversations. The way that Tim mentored me was he invited me into his world and made me part of his world, and everything I learned from him just about was not taught as much as it was modeled. And I've got a whole essay I released recently about it on scottsauls.com, so I won't belabor that. But bottom line, if you have as much integrity in private as you do in public, you're going to be a good mentor to the people around you. Even if you don't give a word of instruction to them, you will be mentoring the people around you if your private integrity matches your public integrity. The bad mentor is the person who is either a tyrant or a coward in private, and they're a hero in public. Or a person who, has a crowd of thousands of people eating out of the palm of their hands, with thousands of people just sitting there feeling like, oh, he knows me so well, and privately, people just feel you're incredibly unapproachable and inaccessible. Like you've got to close that gap between private life and public life to have integrity, and also to have moxie as one who would be a mentor, whether that means you're a formal mentor where you actually sit down with people and talk through things, or whether you're a mentor by example, because your way kind of rubs off on the people around you. And Tim was more the second kind of mentor, at least to me, is that I was just I came in to Redeemer World so impressed by his public ministry, and left Redeemer so impressed by his private reality, where he's just a very humble man.
So you would say would you say that he's a 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ, an invitation mentor? And then how would you be different than Tim that way, Scott?
Tim would never say follow my example because he's too humble to talk like that.
He just did it.
And that's not to say the Apostle Paul wasn't humble, but
Sure.
but Tim would never say follow my example, and Tim would never say I follow the example of Christ. He's much more circumspect than, again, the Apostle.
I think we might have a little. Oh, there we go. I thought we had a freeze up there for a moment. I think we might have a little freeze up here. Looks like we're frozen.
Oh,
there we go.
Back?
We're back.
You there?
Yeah, I think we lost.
Sorry about that.
For
I
about a
must have
minute.
been on my end.
No,
Sorry about that.
No, not at all.
So yeah, I think we were just talking about mentoring, but
how does that work for you then, Scott? How's the mentoring you to other people around you?
For me, I avail for other pastors, to a point. Obviously, we're all finite and have limited bandwidth, and especially to leaders on our team at Christ Pres. The way that I think mentoring works the best is when it's driven by the one being mentored, when the agenda is driven by the one being mentored. Because I figure if I bring you on my team, you already belong there. You know what I mean? There's a certain degree to which I don't need to develop you, because you're already, the primary qualification, at least in our world, is that you're a person of character and integrity. And in terms of mentoring and the nuts and bolts of ministry, you have access to everything I've written. You have access to my office. You know when my office hours are. You know that I'll meet with you anytime during those hours. But what I will not bring especially in a one-on-one kind of mentoring situation, is a curriculum. And that's not to say that curriculums are not good curricula or bad things. There are people all over the place who use them very effectively. But my thought process there is everybody's unique, everybody's different, and because of that, everybody has different needs. One person may be an amazing communicator, but a very weak organizer and administrator, and then another person might be the opposite. And so I guess my approach is more responsive as a sort of player coach, and less sort of curriculum driven. Although, I do think there's great value to having a good, solid, comprehensive curriculum. I mean, that's why we have things like seminaries and other, training, networks and so on.
Yeah. Wow. That's, I'm really struck by 1 Corinthians 11:1 has always been a passage that's meant something to me. And I like the way you said Keller wouldn't even go there. Like, he's so humble to even acknowledge, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. That's something I'm going to chew on long past this interview. Let me just say that, Scott. So
let me say this. I will say that the Apostle Paul had every right to say those words as well. I don't want to come across as saying Paul was a cocky guy. He was a confident guy. He was a confident guy, but he was also a supremely humble guy as well. So yeah.
Let me jump to the thing again, back to kind of what we do focused on men, and I'm going to kind of round some numbers up here. But the Southern Baptist Press had that study a number of years ago, and it's probably been changed and adapted a little bit. I'm sure you've heard of this, but like if you reach a child for Christ, it's something less than 10%. You get the whole family. If you reach the mother, the wife, the woman, it's like 20%, give or take, chance you get the whole family for Christ. If you reach the man, I think it's like 91% chance you get the whole family. So speak to, I'm kind of teeing you up to kind of come our way, but speak to the importance of reaching men for Christ, for the kingdom's sake today. Why is that important?
Well, I mean, it's important because the Great Commission is still in effect. Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything I've told, to obey everything I commanded, baptizing them, and I'm with you always to the very end of the age. Men are part of that equation. I'm personally, I'm personally on the one hand reluctant to say, one group is more important than another to reach, while at the same time being very intrigued by your statistics, and being very intrigued by, the insights that you just shared. And I'm certain there's a whole lot to them. I'm 100% positive there's a whole lot to them. Because in my experience and observation, especially in the American West, and I don't know if your survey covers the American West or the whole world, but in the American West, men tend to be much more distracted and ambivalent when it comes to spirituality. Distracted by excessive work and excessive leisure, and distracted by porn, among other things. But and I think all of those distractions are some way and in some shape and form, they trace back to shame. Mm-hmm. And shame runs for the hills from anything that feels, looks, or sounds like religion. And so I think, rather than saying it's so important to reach men, I think that's supremely important, and I think it's practically true that if the man in the house, who is typically the most uninspired person in the house, typically women and children, and this is broad generalization, and I know there are tons of exceptions, but typically women and children are much more inspired than much more easily inspired than men are. And so if you catch the guy, you're going to have a better chance of everybody else getting on board rather than the other way around. That's a sociological comment that's from the bleachers, by the way, not not from the playing field and not from the arena. I'm commenting from the bleachers there. Leave it to the experts like you to give the statistics. But I think what I'd rather also say is that the way we reach men is supremely important, because what inspires a guy? What inspires a 42-year-old guy? Not much. His job, if he's successful at it, if he's struggling at his job, it has the opposite of inspiring him. It depresses him and hurts him. And team sports, the gladiator stuff, right? And when I say gladiator, I'm including the tennis court and the golf course, as well as, the boxing ring, right? I don't want to like stereotype all men as this macho thing, but competition and victory and overcoming. And I think that's why so many men in their midlife especially are so defeated, is that they had a vision earlier in life to overcome and face struggle and roadblocks along the way, and started feeling defeated. And maybe they feel the same way in their marriage. They feel like a failure relationally, or they feel like a failure because they don't have nearly as many friends as they did in college, or whatever. But what can the stereotypical guy in the kind of conversation we're having right now?
Frozen up again. Coming back.
You there?
There we go. We're coming back. Okay.
All right. Sorry,
That's
it's
okay.
my end.
No,
I've got a spotty connection. But I'll land the plane here so we don't get cut off again. But I think that the gospel as story, as this demon against all odds, conquered death, conquered the ultimate enemy, and is able to conquer us in the great and the best sort of way, to conquer us in order to rescue us. I think that's the story that's going to resonate with a lot of the kinds of guys we're talking about right now, and maybe call them to something bigger. I think too. I think we're too tame in what we call people to in the gospel. I think we need to raise the bar instead of keeping it low. Because what person, what guy, what man, woman, or child wants to rise to a low bar? Big whoop. That's boring. Give me a challenge. Give me something to go for. Give me something to live for and give my life to. I wonder if that's why Islam is growing faster than Christianity in the West right now, because Christianity has gotten so soft and so undemanding in the call to discipleship, maybe we need to return to, hey, there's this bold grace, like there's no condemnation in Christ, and nothing can separate you from the love of God in Christ. And so that is the invitation to become the greatest version of yourself that you imagine you could ever be, because God's in that with you.
Well, and that's what you're, Scott, I think that's what with your writing, and I can't wait till next time down there. I hope I get there and you're preaching on a given Sunday. That's what I think you're inviting people into. You're going in, head of the storm sometimes with some of these issues that we've got to deal with. And leaders, whether it's me, whether it's you, whatever, going forward, people want to see the gospel fleshed out. I use Nashville, being from there myself, as an example. A guy on a Sunday morning, when he can go to the many country clubs that are down there, or go get Loveless Cafe for breakfast, or Pancake Pantry, or Starbucks, or go to Opry Mills or Cool Springs, or spend the day working in the yard or doing whatever, there's umpteen million things calling for his time and attention, an extra hour of sleep, versus showing up at church somewhere. And I think, I'm grateful for church culture that I think has really gone away from the seeker-sensitive, seeker-friendly option that was popular maybe 10, 15 years ago, because I think people want what's real, maybe what's challenging. And I really appreciate what you said there, Scott. I think I want to be sensitive to your time because you're already giving me probably a little bit more than what we planned on. But let me ask you about this, and I want to hit some highlights of the book real quick. During this time, I think for any of us, I know I've worked on this, I'm sure you have, talk about the rest and rhythms and overflow of your life to live out the life you're trying to lead. You started heading towards best version of self type of language. I think for any of us, if we're in ministry full time, if we're trying to serve the Lord on every and all ends, how we do that out of rest and out of rhythm, out of overflow. The famous Dallas Willard quote about ruthlessly eliminate hurry. What does that look like in Scott Sauls' life?
Well, I mean, we just, came up with a six course menu, not really a menu, but a 6-course meal for our people. And we've said to them, if you want to flourish as a human being, if you want to flourish as God's person, it's a lot like being an athlete. You've got to give yourself to a regimen. You've got to say yes to some things that will lead you to say no to some other things, and you've got to be all in. And that doesn't mean that God will love you more. It means that this is your pathway to flourish as somebody who belongs to Him. And we've said that whatever you have to do and however you have to rearrange your life, be fully present with the local church every single Sunday of your life for the rest of your life. And yeah, I really mean that. Like blow is doing, with 1.7 times a month or whatever anemic, number there is. Make a commitment to be fully present with a local church every single Sunday for the rest of your life. Fully present. Get there early, show up late. Go there not just to receive, but also to give, to serve, to make somebody's day. And then second, be fully present with Jesus Christ every single day of your life. And then after that, get part of a group of trusted friends that you can work through and process through the things that you pick up every Sunday of your life and every day of your life. Every Sunday of your life with the church and every day of your life with Jesus. Get into a group of people that you can work that stuff out with in community. Take every opportunity to be with them. And then befriend and bring in to those 3 worlds people who don't already have a church. Whether they say they're Christian or not, people who don't already have a church, befriend and bring in people into those 3 environments and make that a habit for the rest of your life. And then become an outward-facing person in the places where you live, work, and play. Do everything that you can in your power to leave the world better than you found it. And that especially includes whatever your work is. White collar, blue collar, indoor, outdoor, make a lot of money, make no money, whatever your work is, whether you're a stay-at-home parent or running an organization, or you're a professional athlete or whatever you are, whatever you're doing, do with all your heart and serve the work. Don't just use the work, serve the work.
You were influenced, I assume, by Redeemer there, right? Because I know Keller and Redeemer's pretty big.
And we started a Faith and Work Institute, Nashville Institute for Faith and Work in Nashville, out of our church as well, something very similar. But if you build your life around those practices, that's what Michael Jordan did to become Michael Jordan on the basketball court. He wasn't just talented, you guys. He was talented, but he wasn't just talented. He was the hardest working player in the league. And the same could be said of Kobe Bryant. The same could be said of LeBron. They're not just the most talented, they're also the hardest working. There is no contradiction between being a recipient of grace and working at zero to belong to Christ, and working with all of your heart to flourish in that belonging. There's no contradiction between those two things. Working hard for your flourishing is in no way, shape, or form going to cause Jesus to love you any more or less, or going to cause Jesus to receive you any more or less. but your enjoyment and flourishing of what is yours in Christ is completely dependent on the combination of God's work in you and you, as Philippians says, working out your salvation, not working on your salvation, but working out your salvation like you work out at the gym to be a better athlete, working out, exercising the salvation that you already have with fear and trembling. And of course, you fear God, you don't have to be afraid of anything, including God. To fear God is to give him the supreme voice in your life and the supreme influence in your life. When you fear God, you don't have to be afraid of anything or anyone, including God. And so it's a win all around. But you have to hit that fork in the road, and you've got to decide. You know what? Is working 70 hours a week, is that going to be what drives my life, and that's going to be the organizing principle of my life? Is obsessing about the next leisure opportunity, is that going to be the organizing principle of my life? Is making more money going to be the organizing principle? Is being the life of the party going to be the organizing principle? Fill in the blank. Or is flourishing in Jesus the organizing principle? And if flourishing in Jesus is the organizing principle, then you're going to say no to some things to say yes to all the things that I just talked about. But at the same time, Jesus is going to send you back into those worlds where you live, work, and play, where you're in relationship, and you're going to flourish more because of the fact that you're giving yourself to him more than you're giving yourself to those things. You're actually going to get those things in abundance, in greater abundance as well. It's like what Lewis said, aim at heaven and you'll get earth thrown in. But if you aim at earth, you'll get neither. And so I think especially in America, now's a time where people identify as Christians, we're faced with a choice. Are we really going to give ourselves to this or not? But let's be honest about it. Because...
what I love about what you're saying, Scott, is I think, there's few images that come to my mind as you're speaking. There's the, are we a river or are we a lake? I think no doubt you're a river. Are we trying to build the kingdom or are we trying to build the local church? I think you're a kingdom guy. And one of the things that's such a challenge for most men, that I'm not trying to overly pat you on the back in a way that you feel like is not fair and honest to who you really are, but you just seem to me like a guy who does not compromise. There's no compartmentalization. There's no this is this part of my life and it's over here. And that's a struggle for most men. And I like what you're saying about where you go all in with Christ and then it's going to come back into the workplace. You go all in with Christ and it's going to come back into the family. You go all in with Christ and it's going to, all those things that we can so easily compartmentalize. I just don't think you do that. So,
well, you should ask my wife about that. But
I knew you'd have some appropriate comment like that. But
oh man,
let me hit a few highlights from the book.
So far to go.
Well, I think you're doing pretty well. So let me hit a few highlights in the book. Like I said, I think it was chapter 2 or 3 about the reforming the Pharisee in us. I was ready to be done with the book right there. I thought, no, he's not going to tell me I'm a Pharisee by the end of the chapter, and you did, and I didn't like it. And one particular area of my life the Lord used to speak to me about it. So you have on page 31, when love your neighbor takes a back seat to American partisanship, when the protection and advancement of our own rights and privileges take precedence over the needs of the least of these spiritually and socially sensitive people, can find it difficult to get on board with versions of Christianity that look, smell, and talk more like Uncle Sam than Jesus Christ. You've kind of already hit on that. I thought that was gold. Another part you said a few pages later, Jesus came to turn his enemies into friends, his friends into family, and his family into joyful participants in his mission. I love that right now as it relates to race. I thought that quote there, anything to elaborate on that right there?
If you're a white person, open your ears and shut your mouth. If you're a person of color, tell your story. And build that conversation. This is really important in a cancel culture. Build that conversation around awareness of the three offices of Christ. And the three offices of Christ represent everything that Christ wants to do in all of us. He's the King, which means he's Lord of this conversation. that he's the driver, that from him and to him and through him is this conversation. It's not even the person of the other race that I'm trying ultimately to please in this conversation. It's Christ. But as a white man, I need to do that with the awareness that Christ is a person of another race than mine. He's a dark-skinned Savior. That's why I made the comment about the Bee Gees before. We have an Americanized version of Jesus, and then we have the biblical one. He's a Middle Eastern refugee, you guys. You know, he would have had brown skin, and he was not Anglo-Saxon. And so, you know, my hope, your hope, rests on the shoulders of a first century Middle Eastern, dark-skinned Jewish man who had no place to lay his head, had refugee status, was homeless in his adult life, and was crucified on a trash heap. And so, you know, what that means is that Jesus reached to the other side of the world and says to his disciples, I want you to go to the ends of the earth and reach people like Scott Sauls. And so in the race conversation, man, just bury your defensiveness. Just bury it. Just don't bring your defensiveness into that conversation if you're part of majority culture.
You're going to my next quote now. That's interesting you just said that. So real quick,
okay.
Can we at least agree that maybe Jesus sang like Barry Gibb? If I can at least have that he sang like Barry Gibb, whether it was the Jimmy Fallon version on SNL or...
Probably not. Okay. I think Jesus was more of a chanter, but he did create Barry Gibb's vocal cords. True. So I'll give you that.
We'll settle on that. So you mentioned defensiveness. I love this on page 61. When the defensiveness rises up, it reveals how little I actually believe the gospel. And I think this paragraph I'm going to read has a lot to do with, like, say, social media or thinking we're the smartest person in the room, our opinions matter, whatever. Which reveals how little I actually believe the gospel, which tells me that in Jesus, I am not condemned, that all my guilt and wrongness has been taken care of at the cross, and that the adopting smile of God hovers over me always. Somehow the cosmic, unshakable truths about my identity in Christ get lost in the noise of even a small, petty, relatively insignificant critique. Mm-hmm. That sounded like that came from a pretty personal place where you've processed some stuff before from yourself, which, like I said, I respect you leading by example in something like that. Anything to elaborate within that?
Well, we're made in the image of a God whose very purpose is to be worshipped. You know, the chief end of a human being, at least our confessional statements say, is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So God exists for the purpose of being glorified and enjoyed. And we're made in his image. And so there's something right about desiring praise, about wanting to hear, great job, I like you, I love you. Like, there's something right about wanting to be affirmed. It's embedded in us, the desire for praise, because God's very existence is about being praised, and we're made in his image. And so there's nothing wrong, there's nothing excessively needy about appreciating compliments. But when we idolize compliments, when we want to be God instead of be like, be made in his image, we want to be treated like we are God, that's when the image of God in us goes wrong, where we want to position ourselves as being above critique, which comes more from a place of neediness. And like, pride is actually an expression of insecurity, which sounds contradictory, but it is. And we act big because we feel small. Just read the story of King Saul in the Old Testament. You'll see how that plays out in the worst way. But criticism, a quote from Mariah Carey comes to mind. She says, I can hear 1,000 words of praise and one criticism, and that one criticism will completely eliminate the 1,000 praises in my mind. We are especially tuned. The volume is turned way up for us on criticism because it's so easy for us to believe, because we know deep down how flawed we are. We're just afraid of getting exposed, like Adam and Eve were in the garden. And the volume for us is also turned way down on the voices that remind us of our dignity. We actually have a hard time believing that we have the dignity that God says we do, and so we fight for an image of dignity forgetting we're made in the image of the God who gives us dignity. And so it's this sort of twisted lie that the devil has been telling very convincingly ever since the days of the Garden of Eden, that God's a liar. That what God says about you, that there's no condemnation for you in Christ, that there's nothing that can separate you from his love, that you're the apple of his eye, that he rejoices over you with singing, that he has plans to prosper you and not to harm you, and plans to give you a hope and a future, that you are his daughter, you are his son. That's all bull. That's not true. You're on your own. That's what he told Adam and Eve. You're on your own. Make your own way. God's not going to come through for you, and we believe him, and we especially believe the voice of shame, which when God exposed Adam and Eve for their shame, we think that shame is going to destroy us, but what God wanted to do in exposing Adam and Eve was to cover them. God didn't make any judgmental pronouncements. He just said, Adam, where are you? Where are you, man? And then he provides a covering when it boils down to a distrust of God. That's why we get testy and defensive, is because we don't really believe that we precious in his sight. We believe the voice of shame more than we believe the voice of the gospel, and we need to turn the volume up on the gospel and turn the volume down on shame.
Well, there's 3 or 4 more quotes I had, but I want to just get to this one and kind of leave this as a close. And I'd like to pray for you, Scott, before we get off here. Towards the end here on page 125, you say, 124, we need a gentle posture before the Lord, his word and his truth-telling messengers to become the people he desires for us to be. And I just keep thinking about, for the gathering and for where my field that I'm supposed to attend is, what would it look like? We just got into July. What would it look like July 1st to June 30th next year if we really focused on being a ministry of men and those that we touch and connect with and do life with, who really embodied gentleness? I think it's probably of the fruit of the Spirit, it's probably the least talked about, in some ways the least glorified or whatever, and yet between your book and other things I've been reading, I've just been really challenged by it. So Scott, it goes without saying, thank you for your investment in me. This is the first time we've actually talked. We've done some dialogue through email, through Facebook Messenger, or whatever, but I feel like you have invested in my life, so I'm grateful for that. Through that, I've passed you on to other people, so you've invested then beyond me to some in my world, and I appreciate that. And if I could pray for you, and just thanks again. I want people to know this book, A Gentle Answer, can be a game changer. I think your heart and the words in there can really be a great building block for people with what we're going through. I was a part of a Rotary Club meeting yesterday that had some goofiness with people just they kind of want to say their thing and not. I like the way you said just shut up and we need to listen to somebody else speak. And so thanks for much of what you shared. Let me pray for you, Scott.
Oh, my pleasure.
Many blessings on your day, God. Thanks for Scott as a man, as your child, as your son, and as a guy you're building much life into. Thanks for the platform you've given him, not just at Christ Presbyterian, but as an author, as a blogger, as a man in Nashville, Tennessee, back to ties in New York City and all around in his neighborhood, with pastors he connects with in metropolitan central Tennessee, and also to other parts as he connects far and wide. And God, we just pray for a great season of rest, of rhythm, of living out of overflow. Pray for him as a family man. We pray that those that are closest to him and dearest to him would love him the most and be his biggest fans. And just thanks for his investment with us today, with this time here on Facebook and with our podcast. And God, we just pray that as he pours himself out for others, for you, that he would receive much more than what he gives. And just make today and the rest of it just a great day where Scott experiences your goodness and your presence in a real way. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for joining us. Many blessings to Christ Presbyterian and your work there.
Thanks so much.
We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.